I had just taken my first sip of coffee when my phone buzzed with that kind of urgency that makes your stomach twist. It was my manager, something about a client emergency and needing someone on a plane within hours. And of course, I said yes. That's what I do. I fix things. I show up. I carry the weight so no one else has to. I tossed a few work outfits into my bag, heart racing but steady, already planning my approach before even leaving the house. Mark was sprawled across the couch when I told him. He barely sat up, just blinked a few times and mumbled something about me being amazing. "Go save the world," he said, forcing a lazy grin. I leaned in, kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, but something about the way he looked at me felt distant. I almost asked if everything was okay, but I didn't. I figured he was tired. We'd been distant lately, sure, but I thought it was just life getting in the way. So I grabbed my bag and left. The airport was loud and buzzing, but weirdly, it brought me a bit of peace. I found a seat near the gate, opened my laptop, and tried to shift into work mode. That's when my phone lit up again. It was Mrs. Halverson, our elderly neighbor who always waved when I pulled into the driveway. "Hi, dear. Could you please ask your husband to turn the music down? The party is getting a bit out of hand." My stomach dropped. My first thought was, what party? And then just like that, something in me clicked. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I booked a car back home. The car ride home felt endless. Every red light stretched like a cruel joke. Every slow driver ahead of us felt personal. My mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking maybe it was nothing, maybe a misunderstanding, a neighbor mixing up addresses, or a surprise he hadn't mentioned. But that sinking feeling in my gut? It wasn't new. It had been whispering to me for months. The way he'd been pulling away, the distracted looks, the way he laughed more with strangers on his phone than with me over dinner. I stared out the window, barely blinking, my heart thudding like it knew what I didn't want to admit. I'd spent years building something steady with him, something real, something safe. I held us together when work got hard, when the spark faded, when life turned us into distant roommates. I believed love was showing up even when things weren't easy. But now, that belief felt like a thread unraveling, and I couldn't stop pulling at it, even as I wished with everything in me that I was wrong. The driver asked if I was okay when I clenched the seatbelt so tightly my knuckles went white. I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? "I think my husband threw a party the second I left for the airport." It sounded ridiculous. It felt surreal. I hadn't even been gone 2 hours. But my hands were shaking. Something was happening. Something I wasn't meant to see. And yet, something told me I needed to see it. I needed to catch it before it vanished behind lies and empty apologies. As we turned onto my street, I could already hear it, the bass thudding through the pavement, laughter spilling out into the night air like it belonged to someone else's life. There were cars everywhere, parked along the curb, half on lawns, headlights still warm. My heart was racing, but my face stayed still. I don't know how I kept my composure. Maybe part of me had already broken on the ride home. Or maybe I'd trained myself too well to stay calm when the ground beneath me was crumbling. The porch light was on. That same warm glow I used to associate with comfort. Now it just felt like a spotlight, waiting to expose whatever was on the other side of the door. I didn't even knock. I had keys. It was my house. At least I thought it was. The moment I stepped inside, it was like I'd walked into a different universe. Loud music, perfume in the air, people I'd never seen lounging on my furniture, laughing like they belonged there, like I didn't. I stood there, invisible in my own home. No one noticed me. Not at first. I could have screamed, but I didn't. I just watched. And with every second, the quiet inside me grew louder. I hadn't even made it past the hallway, but I already knew. Something had shifted. Permanently. And I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with chilling certainty. I hadn't come home early just to disappear. I stepped further inside, and the sound hit me like a wave. Laughter, clinking glasses, loud music echoing off the walls I once painted myself. Every inch of the house felt foreign, like someone had stolen the skeleton of my life and dressed it up in chaos. There were women everywhere. Tight dresses, high heels, red lipstick smudged across cocktail glasses. Strangers, giggling in corners, snapping selfies against the backdrop of my living room, the same one where I once hung Christmas stockings. No one turned to look at me. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. One woman brushed past me on her way to the kitchen, not even offering a glance. I saw open bottles of wine on the counter, sticky liquor spills on the floor, and the vase Mark gave me for our 5th anniversary now filled with plastic straws. I stood in the center of it all, completely still. It was like walking into someone else's life, except it was mine. And he had opened the door wide, letting the world walk all over it. I moved slowly, trying to make sense of it. Not screaming, not crying, just watching, observing, collecting. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome to the numbness setting in. And still, not a single person seemed to care that I was there. I passed by my own wedding photo, shoved face down on a side table, like even the house itself was trying to forget I ever existed in it. But I remembered. Every wall, every memory. And still, I kept walking. I followed the sound of louder music toward the backyard, and that's when I saw him. Mark, shirtless, grinning, holding a drink like he hadn't a care in the world. He was seated like a king, sprawled in one of the patio chairs, surrounded by 3 women who looked like they belonged on the cover of a cheap magazine. One had her hand on his shoulder. Another was feeding him something off a toothpick. The third? She was on his lap, her head tilted back in laughter, like they shared some secret joke. Time didn't stop. It didn't even slow. But everything inside me did. I didn't yell. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, watching the man I married laugh like a teenager on spring break, completely at home in the wreckage he created. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not a crack, not a break. A clean snap. Like a cord being cut. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something colder, something quieter, something far more dangerous. Eventually, he saw me. Our eyes locked, and that smirk on his face drained into confusion, then panic. He froze, mid-sip. The woman in his lap turned to see what he was staring at. But I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I let him sit there, unraveling under the weight of my silence. I turned around, walked past the mess, past the strangers, past the music, and stepped out of the house like it never belonged to me at all. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't break down. I walked. Slow, deliberate, one foot in front of the other. My heels sank slightly into the grass as I moved past the line of cars cluttering the curb. I didn't even look back. Not once. Because I knew if I did, I might lose that strange, steady calm holding me together. And I needed that calm more than I needed answers. More than I needed apologies. I wasn't ready to scream. I was ready to think. Inside the car, I sat in silence for a long time. The engine was off, windows slightly cracked. I could still hear the thump of the music, feel the bass in my chest like it was mocking me. But in that stillness, I made a quiet promise to myself. He wouldn't get a second chance to explain this away. Not with a stuttered excuse, not with drunken nonsense, not with flowers and fake tears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. And now, I had one to make too. I didn't drive off right away. I just let the reality settle over me like a second skin. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real. And it had unfolded right in front of my eyes. And while he was still inside playing the part of some bachelor, I was already writing the next scene. One where I didn't fall apart. One where I didn't beg. One where I took back the pen and rewrote the ending myself. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things or call my best friend in the middle of the night. Instead, I went quiet. That dangerous kind of quiet that comes when a woman has seen enough. The kind of quiet that listens, plans, calculates. The next morning, while he was probably nursing a hangover and pretending nothing had happened, I was already sitting in a lawyer's office. I told her everything, every detail, and she didn't flinch, just nodded, handed me a pen, and got to work. When I got home, I didn't confront him. He wasn't even there. That helped. I went straight to the security system he had forgotten even existed. The tiny cameras we installed years ago after a neighbor's car got broken into. He'd barely touched the app since, but I had. I downloaded the footage from the night of the party. Every frame, every sound, the women, the drinking, the way he laughed about me being too busy playing boss. It was all there, waiting for me like cold evidence on a silver platter. I didn't even feel angry watching it. Not anymore. What I felt was clarity, for the first time in years maybe. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to be methodical. Not for revenge, not yet, but for self-respect. I froze the joint accounts. All of them. He never noticed I was the one depositing most of the money anyway. I called the bank, updated my passwords, reset everything he could ever try to weasel his way back into. I was done playing supportive. By the third day, I changed the locks. He was still gone, probably staying with a friend, or more likely with one of those women who thought his cheap charm was something rare. I didn't care where he was. I only cared that when he returned, he'd know without a word that the door he used to walk through without question no longer recognized him. I watched from the upstairs window as the locksmith worked, the metal clicking into place like punctuation on the sentence I'd waited years to write. Then I packed his things. Not carefully, not cruelly, just deliberately. Every shirt he left draped over the armchair, every cologne bottle he used before a night out, with the guys. Trash bags, not boxes, not luggage. Because when someone treats your life like it's disposable, you learn to stop wrapping their mess in niceties. I left them out front, right by the walkway, and then I taped the envelope to the door. Inside, a legal notice, divorce papers, and a copy of the footage. Neatly labeled, no explanation needed. It started raining shortly after. I don't know why that part sticks with me, but it does. I watched the trash bags get wet from the window, the fabric inside soaking through, colors darkening. But I didn't feel bad. Not for a second. I actually felt light. Like I'd just peeled off a heavy coat I didn't know I'd been wearing. And maybe part of me hoped he'd show up right then, soaked and scrambling. But he didn't. And that silence? That was the first real peace I'd had in years. He showed up the next evening, just as the sun was dipping below the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn, and across the bags that still sat untouched, right where I left them. I watched him from the kitchen, lights off, heart steady. He stood there for a moment, like he wasn't sure if he was at the right house. He tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. He knocked, softly at first, then louder. But I didn't move. Let him knock. Let him feel the distance he created with every careless choice. Then he noticed the envelope. I saw his face change, from confusion to disbelief to that wounded look men wear when they realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. He opened it right there on the porch. I imagined him reading every line, watching every second of the footage, feeling his little empire crack beneath him. He looked around, like he expected me to appear. Maybe to fight. Maybe to forgive. But I didn't give him either. I stayed behind the curtain, quiet, still, powerful. For years, I carried our life like a fragile vase, always careful not to drop it. He danced through it with muddy shoes. And now? Now he stood alone on the front step of a house that didn't belong to him anymore. And I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel pity. I felt ready. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the start of what I had planned next. I didn't scream on the porch, and I didn't text him afterward. Instead, I started with something quieter, something cleaner. I found the guest list. Not that it was official, of course, but thanks to social media and the security footage, it wasn't hard to identify the faces. I gathered names, matched them to profiles, found addresses. Some women were tagged in photos. Others had posted stories from my living room, drunk and glittery, dancing beside my wedding portrait. They didn't even blur my name in the background. I created packages, anonymous, brown envelopes, no return address. Inside each, screenshots, short video clips, carefully chosen stills from that night. And a note, not cruel, just honest. You were at this party. Did you know he was married? Most of them didn't. I wasn't surprised. Mark always had a way of making himself seem like a victim, the hard-working husband with the cold, absent wife. She's married to her job, I heard him say in one of the clips. Forgot how to be a wife a long time ago. That line became my favorite, because one of the women, the one in the red dress with the fake laugh, clearly hadn't known. And she was the one who posted the footage, not anonymously, not quietly. She blasted it online with a caption that read, "When you find out the guy you were flirting with all night has a wife, and she's a badass." It spread fast, faster than I expected. And I never said a word. I let it move on its own, like wildfire. At first, he tried to control the damage, took the video down from his own page, reported the posts, claimed it was taken out of context, but it was too late. People had already shared it, saved it, dissected it. It was in private group chats, work threads, even some meme pages. His voice, slurring that awful sentence, "She forgot how to be a wife," was now soundtrack to his downfall. And I didn't need to lift a finger. I just watched, quietly, while his carefully polished image unraveled. The fallout came swiftly. His boss called him in for a conversation. The company had a strict code of conduct, and even though the party was technically off the clock, the optics were bad, especially with the comments flooding in. Women calling him manipulative, men calling him careless. A few called him the guy from the video, like he was a punchline. I heard through a mutual friend that his promotion was quietly rescinded. No big announcement, just a quiet door closing behind him. As for his social circle, they scattered like roaches under kitchen lights. The ones who used to toast beers with him on weekends suddenly had plans. The men who cheered him on now avoided eye contact. And the women, well, they remembered the footage. They remembered the smirk, the lap, the arrogance. No one likes to realize they were just another prop in someone else's fantasy. And me? I stayed silent. I never gloated, never clapped back. I let the silence speak for me. People started whispering my name, not in pity, but with a kind of reverence. At my job, colleagues looked at me differently. Not like a victim, but like a woman who had drawn a line and dared someone to cross it. A few even pulled me aside, quietly admitting they had gone through something similar but never knew how to take their power back. That's the thing. When a woman doesn't scream, when she doesn't crumble, people don't know what to do with her strength. So they call it cold. I called it peace. I never replied to the DMs he sent once the backlash started. I saw the panic in them, the rapid shift from defensive to desperate. "You're really going to ruin me over one stupid night?" he wrote once. And I laughed. Ruin him? No, he did that all by himself. I just handed him the mirror, and in the reflection, there wasn't a man. There was a boy who thought charm was currency and that silence meant submission. He had no idea that silence could roar louder than rage. And I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. All I needed was that moment. Quiet, late at night, standing by my window, watching the world move on while his fell apart. That was enough. But even then, I knew I wasn't finished. There was still one chapter left to write. Not for him, not for revenge, but for me. For the version of myself I had nearly lost in loving the wrong person for too long. My new apartment wasn't big. It didn't need to be. It had white walls, high windows, and a quiet that wasn't heavy. It was healing. I filled it slowly, intentionally. A worn leather chair I found at a vintage shop. A small bookshelf with only the books I loved, not the ones I used to buy for display. A bottle of wine always chilled, just in case I wanted to toast to absolutely nothing. It wasn't about starting over. It was about starting true, with no audience, no performance, just me. I began to remember myself in pieces, in the silence of Sunday mornings, in the way I made my coffee, strong and black, just how I like it, no one else to adjust for. In the music I played while folding laundry, dancing barefoot in the kitchen without worrying if I looked silly. There was no grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of triumph, just small, ordinary moments that slowly whispered, "You're home now." And for the first time in years, I believed them. I started reconnecting with friends I had slowly drifted from, not because of fights, but because I had spent so long managing his moods, his chaos, his storms. I laughed more. I slept better. And I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the person who kept kicking it off was no longer part of my story. Healing didn't come in waves. It came in layers. Soft, steady, mine. And I didn't miss him. Not once. What I missed was the woman I used to be. And now, she was back. Then one evening, just as the city lights began to flicker on and the hum of the world slowed to a hush, my phone lit up. A number I hadn't blocked, not out of hesitation, but out of apathy. I didn't need to cut him off completely. He was already gone. The message was short. I was drunk. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a while, not because I was tempted, but because it was almost laughable how little had changed for him. No accountability, no real apology. Just a desperate, sloppy reach for the version of me who would have said, "Okay, let's talk." But that woman no longer lived here. She packed her bags the same night I did. So I blocked the number, not out of anger, not even out of satisfaction, just necessity. Like deleting a song you once loved, but now can't stand to hear. I wasn't angry. I was simply uninterested. His voice had become background noise I no longer had to tolerate. And that, more than anything, was the victory. Not the trash bags, not the legal papers, not the viral video. It was this: being unmoved, free. Calm in a way that no one could shake. The kind of calm that comes not from winning a battle, but from walking away from a war you never wanted in the first place. The kind of calm you sip like wine at the end of a long day. Grateful, not because it's perfect, but because it's finally yours. That night I opened a bottle of wine, the good one, the one I'd been saving without even knowing what for. I curled up by the window, glass in hand, city below me, soft music playing in the background. No tears, no heavy reflections, just a moment of stillness. And then I raised my glass, not to him, not to revenge, but to the decision that changed everything, coming home early. That one twist of fate, that single instinct to turn back. It didn't just end a party, it saved my life. I thought about how many times I'd ignored my gut, how often I'd smoothed over cracks with hope and silence. But not anymore. Now I listen. To the warning signs, to the quiet voice inside me, to the feeling that tells you something's not right. And I honor it. That's what this was really about. Not punishing him, not proving anything, but choosing myself, fully, finally, unapologetically. So, if you ask me if I regret it, the answer is no. I don't regret coming home early. I don't regret what I saw. I don't regret walking away without a word. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is show up at the exact moment she wasn't expected, and instead of falling apart, she begins again, stronger than ever.
So I sold my apartment, bought a seaside cottage, and gave him the keys. That same evening, he gave me divorce papers. Those words still echo in my memory, not because they shocked me, but because I knew they were coming. He just didn't know that I knew. My name is Elena. I'm 52 years old. I've been married to Patrick for 27 years. Or more accurately, I was. Until the night he mistook my silence for stupidity. We were, by all appearances, the perfect couple. He ran his own consultancy firm. I was a high school administrator, well-organized, emotionally stable, the kind of woman people trust to keep things running. And I did. For years. I managed our calendar, paid the bills, helped him draft his business proposals, cooked for his clients, remembered birthdays, anniversaries, networking events. When Patrick lost a client or a deal, I tightened the budget. When he celebrated a win, I clapped the loudest. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being his partner and became his background, his constant, his convenience. Still, I believed in our marriage. We had built a life together, one that included lazy Sundays, family dinners, and a dream we both shared since our honeymoon, to one day retire by the sea. He used to say, "One day I want to wake up, hear the waves, and feel peace." So when we found a quaint coastal town 3 hours from the city, and I saw a listing for a white-shuttered cottage with a wraparound porch and ocean views, I thought, this is it. I didn't tell Patrick right away. I sold the apartment my aunt had left me, a beautiful, well-located space that was entirely in my name. It had been our safety net for years. Quietly, I closed the deal. I arranged everything under my name, paid in full, decorated the place with soft linen, seaside art, and wind chimes. Then I called Patrick and said, "Pack a bag. I want to show you something." He was delighted. "A surprise?" "This is new," he said, kissing my cheek. "You're spoiling me." We drove there together. He hummed along to his favorite playlist. He held my hand at red lights. At one point, he said, "I love you, you know that? You always make life better." I looked out the window and smiled. "Do I?" I thought. When we pulled up to the cottage, Patrick gasped. "Elena, this is incredible." I handed him the keys. "It's ours," I said softly. He turned to me, eyes glassy. "You bought this for us?" I nodded. "For you, really. You always wanted it." He hugged me tightly. "This changes everything," he whispered. He had no idea how true that was. That night, after dinner, after wine, after a slow walk along the beach, he pulled a folder from his bag. He placed it on the table beside the candlelight. "Elena," he said, "I didn't plan to do this here, but I've met someone. This is divorce paperwork. I thought this would be clean, dignified." He expected me to fall apart, but I just blinked, then smiled. "Thank you," I said. And that's when he began to lose control, and I began to take mine back. People think betrayal comes in a flash, one violent moment, one scandal, one lie. But real betrayal, it's quieter than that. It happens slowly, like water wearing down stone. And by the time you notice, the foundation's already hollow. Patrick and I met when we were both 24, two wildly different people who somehow fit. He was magnetic, impulsive, full of ideas and bold dreams. I was careful, steady, already thinking 5 steps ahead. In many ways, I grounded him, and in return, I thought he made life feel more alive. We got married a year later in a modest ceremony by a lake. No big speeches, no extravagant decor, just the two of us, saying forever without understanding what that would eventually cost. In the early years, I supported both of us while he jumped from startup to startup. He had ideas but never followed through. Still, I believed in him. I edited his pitch decks after work, cooked dinner while he researched markets. used my credit card to keep us afloat while he waited for the next big break. He promised it would all be worth it. That one day, we'd sit on a porch somewhere near the sea, with coffee and salt in our hair, and laugh at how hard it had been. So I waited. I worked. I adjusted. When I got promoted to department head, Patrick said, "That's great, less pressure on me now." When I got tenure, he said, "Finally, we have real security." I thought we were building something together. Turns out, I was just giving him soft landings while he rehearsed his next takeoff. Still, I dismissed the red flags. The work trips that got longer. The texts he wouldn't let me read. The quiet nights where he sat beside me, physically present, emotionally absent. I told myself this is what long marriages look like. People get comfortable. They change. And I loved him. Or maybe I loved the idea of us, of who we used to be. I even remember the last time he looked at me the way he used to. It was 2 years ago on our 25th anniversary. We were at a little cabin in the woods, a gift I booked myself because he forgot to plan. We sat under the stars sipping wine, and he said, "You've always been my anchor." Back then, I smiled and thanked him. Now, I realize anchors keep you from drifting, but they can also keep you stuck. When we got back from that trip, something changed. He grew colder, more distracted. Business was stressful, he said. He was tired, overwhelmed, needed space. I offered patience. He took silence. I didn't know then that another woman was already orbiting him. Someone who saw only the shine, not the truth. Someone who hadn't cleaned up after his failures or patched up his broken dreams. Her name would come later, but by then it wouldn't matter. Because by the time Patrick handed me that folder in the seaside cottage, I wasn't a woman caught off guard. I was a woman prepared. And his mistake wasn't cheating. His mistake was thinking I wouldn't know what to do once he did. They say your body knows long before your mind is ready to accept it. Mine did. I started waking up at 3 a.m. with a tightness in my chest. I'd roll over and look at Patrick, asleep, peaceful, undisturbed. Sometimes I'd hear the soft vibration of his phone on the nightstand. He never moved to check it. He had long since learned to silence notifications around me. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto him, that after nearly 3 decades, of course things would feel different. But it was more than distance. It was strategy. He had become too careful, too considerate at the wrong times. He no longer complained about work, but also never let me visit his office. He started forgetting to include me in plans, business dinners, weekend trips, even birthdays. One day, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket. A boutique hotel across town. The date matched a night he said he was in Baltimore. I turned the paper over and saw her name scribbled in Sharpie, Michelle. Room 203. My hand shook, not from shock, but from clarity. Still, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I put the receipt in a file marked house repairs and slid it under a stack of manuals in my desk drawer. That night, I kissed him goodnight and said I loved him. That was the moment I knew I would leave him. Not emotionally, I had already done that. I would leave him on my terms, and he would never see it coming. Over the next month, I started collecting shadows. I checked our shared bank account. Small transfers, just under $2,000, sent to a new consulting vendor. I Googled the business. It didn't exist. I pulled our credit report. His card had several luxury purchases, jewelry, spa packages, a pair of Italian shoes, size 7 women's. I took screenshots, printed statements, bookmarked every article on digital infidelity tracking. I created a secure folder on a cloud drive and labeled it Garden Plans. One evening, Patrick mentioned a conference in Palm Beach. I smiled, nodded, and booked myself a quiet Airbnb just outside the coastal town we used to dream about. I spent 2 nights walking along the beach, breathing, thinking, remembering who I was before I became his support system. On the 3rd day, I made a decision. I called Danielle, a former student of mine who had become a lawyer. She had once told me at a reunion, "If you ever need legal help, I'm the calm before their storm." She was right. We met for coffee. I showed her everything. The receipts, the bank statements, The prenup. She read it twice, then leaned back. You've got him. Hard. He won't know what hit him. There was a clause in the agreement, buried, half forgotten, and that said in the case of infidelity, all shared property reverts to the spouse who didn't violate the terms. I remember laughing, not out of joy, but out of poetic disbelief. He had insisted on the prenup back then, to protect his future. Turns out it was my parachute all along. From that moment on, I moved with precision. I reached out to a realtor, quietly listed my apartment, made sure it sold privately. No social media, no signs. Patrick thought I was attending a teacher's retreat. I was finalizing a wire transfer on a house by the sea, a house I bought in my name, with my money, with my peace, all while he planned his grand betrayal. He thought I was blind, but I was watching, and soon he'd learn what it means to be seen. I've always believed that true revenge isn't about destruction, it's about design. I didn't want to ruin Patrick's life. I wanted him to walk straight into the future he'd built and realize every piece of it belonged to me. After Danielle confirmed the prenup strength and advised me on the legal steps, I spent the next 4 weeks orchestrating my departure, but not in a rush. This wasn't about escape. It was about timing. I began by finalizing the sale of my apartment. Quietly, discreetly. The buyer was a retired couple who loved the layout and paid in cash. It was clean, fast. The proceeds went directly into a separate account in my name, shielded from joint access, documented with Danielle's help. Then I went house hunting. The cottage wasn't just perfect, it was poetic. A little white home nestled between dunes, facing the Atlantic, with pale blue shutters and a weathered deck. The realtor called it a place for peaceful living. I called it the final chess move. I purchased it in full. No mortgage. No trace of Patrick's name. Then I did what no one expects from a woman who's been betrayed. I planned a surprise. I told Patrick I wanted to take a weekend off, just the two of us. I pitched it as a spontaneous trip to recharge. I mentioned nothing about the stress I'd seen on his face lately or the late-night texts he thought I didn't notice. He lit up like a child at Christmas. You're serious? Just us? That's unexpected. I smiled. You've been working hard. You deserve a break. He didn't know I meant from pretending. The day we left, I packed his favorite snacks, curated a playlist, and acted like the woman he used to love. Or the version of her he remembered. Dependable, sweet, naive. He held my hand in the car and said, You've been different lately. Softer. It's nice. I nodded. I've been thinking a lot about the future. When we pulled up to the cottage, he stared, stunned. Elena, you bought this? I handed him the keys. It's yours. He blinked. You mean ours, right? I smiled. He spent the first hour exploring every room, running his fingers along the wooden beams, gazing out the kitchen window at the waves. I can't believe you did this for me, he said, voice low. For us, I corrected. Isn't this what you always wanted? He kissed my forehead. It is. It's perfect. That night, I cooked dinner, shrimp pasta and white wine. He toasted to beginnings. I toasted to endings. And after dessert, he did it. He pulled a folder from his bag, cleared his throat, and said, There's something I need to tell you. I already knew. He slid the papers across the table. Divorce papers. Cleanly typed. He'd even highlighted the clause about fair asset division. Bold of him. I've met someone, he said. It wasn't planned, but it's real. I didn't want to do this here, but this just felt right. He smiled like he expected me to break. But I didn't. I simply slid a second folder from my own bag and placed it beside his. What's this? He asked. A response, I said. He looked confused, then opened it. Inside was my legal filing, our prenup clause highlighted, copies of his financial discrepancies, photos of him and Michelle at a hotel, and a cover letter from Danielle. He went pale. Wait, you knew. For a while, I said softly. I just wanted you to see your dream come true before I took it back. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. That's when I stood. I kissed his cheek. Enjoy your evening, Patrick. You won't be staying here. And I walked out the door, locked it behind me, and left him sitting in a cottage he thought he owned, surrounded by proof that he had already lost it all. I drove back to the city that night with the windows down, the wind cold against my face, and something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the moment he handed me those papers. I didn't feel regret. What I felt was peace. The kind you only find once you've stopped pretending someone else deserves your silence. By the time Patrick tried to call me, I had already blocked his number. I knew he'd try all the stages: confusion, anger, pleading. I had no interest in hearing any of them. Danielle had already filed the official divorce response with the court. Attached was the prenup, the evidence of infidelity, the financial records of his secret withdrawals, and our request to freeze all joint assets pending a full investigation. That meant he could no longer access our retirement savings. Our joint credit cards were disabled. The consulting firm's business account, the one I had helped build, was flagged for audit after a quiet tip from Danielle about suspicious withdrawals. Michelle, as it turned out, didn't like men who couldn't pay for champagne and penthouses. By Wednesday, she was gone. I didn't have to lift a finger. But I did send Patrick one message. It was short. Just a photo of a signed document, the cottage deed, with my name and only my name typed in bold. Underneath, I typed, "You said this was your dream. Thank you for giving me a reason to make it mine." He didn't reply. Instead, I got a message from his lawyer the next day, a vague attempt to dispute ownership of the cottage and request access for personal belongings. Danielle sent back a 2-line email. Our client is not obligated to provide access to a property solely owned under her name. All property rights remain legally protected under the marital infidelity clause. Kindly refer to the attached. The attachment? That same prenup Patrick had proudly drafted 27 years ago when I had more money than he did. The one he insisted we sign to protect his future. Now it was his ruin. The locks on the cottage were changed the day after I left. I made sure the utilities were transferred to my name and that every legal record pointed to sole ownership. Danielle handled all communications. I never had to speak to him again. That Friday, I visited the cottage alone. The air was different without him. Lighter. Even the floorboards seemed to breathe easier. I placed fresh flowers in the kitchen window and lit the fireplace. I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, listening to the waves, the very sound he once said would make him feel whole. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. He had tried to replace me, but I had already replaced him. Not with another man, but with freedom, with silence, with self-worth. Patrick's consulting business began collapsing shortly after. Without access to funds, and with rumors circling about fraud, his clients started pulling away. He sent one desperate email to Danielle, asking if I'd be willing to settle quietly to avoid damage to his professional reputation. She responded with one sentence. My client has already settled with herself. No further response. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Patrick moved into a small rented apartment in the outskirts of town. The fancy car was returned. Michelle blocked him on everything. He had told her he was about to be financially free. In the end, he was just not the way he imagined. As for me, I started sleeping in the cottage full time. The bed felt bigger without resentment. The rooms echoed with peace. I started reading again, writing again, breathing again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't dance. I simply existed. And after all those years of shrinking to fit into Patrick's plans, that in itself was the loudest revenge of all. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slamming fists. Just paperwork, calm voices, and consequences. Patrick sat on one side, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit was wrinkled, collar wilted, hair slightly disheveled like he hadn't slept. I wore navy blue. Clean lines. No makeup, just confidence. Danielle stood beside me, poised and quiet. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to win. The judge reviewed the files. Infidelity evidence. Account withdrawals without spousal consent. Hotel receipts, text messages. The prenup. It was all there, neatly arranged in color-coded tabs. Patrick's lawyer tried to argue the prenup had aged out, that it was signed under different financial conditions. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, looked at him and said, Section 14 states clearly The agreement applies for the duration of the legal marriage. That includes the present. His lawyer fumbled, flipping through the document like he hadn't expected that page to exist. Danielle leaned over and whispered to me, "They thought you were bluffing." Patrick finally spoke. "Elena, can't we handle this like adults? We were married for 27 years. That has to mean something." I looked at him. "It does," I said. "That's why this hurts. But that's also why I'm not letting you rewrite history." The judge ruled within the hour. All jointly held accounts to remain frozen until the final settlement. Patrick forfeits any claim to the seaside cottage. I retain 100% of the proceeds from my sold apartment. Court costs is to cover. Patrick's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes didn't meet mine. Afterward, in the hallway, he tried again. "Elena, I was lost. I made a mistake." "No," I replied. "You made a plan. I just made a better one." He nodded slowly, swallowing the last bit of pride he had left. That night, I returned to the cottage. The sky was overcast. Rain tapped softly on the windows. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in a shawl, and stared at the sea, steady, endless, honest. 2 days later, the cracks in Patrick's life deepened. Word spread in his professional circle. A client I used to make tea for during their meetings called me personally. "I heard what happened," she said. "I never liked the way he spoke to you. If you ever want consulting work, let me know." Another message came from an old friend of his. "I'm sorry, Elena. I didn't know it had gone so far. You deserved better." Even his sister reached out. She'd once stood beside him during family dinners, blindly loyal. Now her text simply read, "I was wrong, and I'm proud of you. And Michelle?" She left a voicemail. Short, bitter. He said he had money, said he had control. Turns out he doesn't even have the house. I deleted it. I didn't need her apologies, just as I didn't need his explanations, because I already had the truth, and peace, and the property deed. I had everything that mattered. The rest? Let it collapse. Let it all fall where it belongs, behind me. The cottage felt different now. Not like a getaway. Not like a place I had to share. It felt like mine. The kitchen smelled like fresh bread again. I let the windows stay open longer. I filled the rooms with books and plants, things Patrick never noticed but always complained were clutter. There were no more hushed arguments in my head. No more tension in the silence. Just the sound of the sea, the occasional creak of old wood, and the peace of my own breathing. I started doing small things I hadn't done in years. I joined a local reading group at the town library. I baked pies for the weekly market just to share. I even signed up to teach a short community workshop, how to understand your finances after divorce. At first, only 3 women showed up. By the second session, it was standing room only. Widows, young wives with questions, single mothers, women who'd handed their financial lives over, just like I once had, and were now searching for the manual they were never given. I didn't preach. I simply shared what I had learned the hard way. And they listened. One of them, a soft-spoken woman named Rachel, hugged me after class. "You have no idea how much you helped me," she said. "I thought I was alone." I smiled. "I thought that too," I told her. Danielle called one evening and asked if I'd be interested in forming a small team, helping other women navigate complex divorces with dignity and strategy. I said yes, not out of revenge, but because I finally understood something. I wasn't made to just endure someone else's chaos. I was made to rebuild, to guide, to live, not for someone else's comfort, but for my own peace. And for the first time in decades, I woke up to the sound of waves, not as the woman who gave everything to someone who didn't deserve it, but as the woman who finally, completely, and beautifully belonged to herself. The final court hearing took place on a rainy Tuesday morning. Patrick arrived alone. No entourage, no smile, just a man who looked like he hadn't stood in the sun in weeks. He wore the same gray suit from our first session, except now it looked like it belonged to someone else. I didn't bring anyone either. I didn't need backup. I had already won everything worth keeping. The hearing lasted under an hour. The judge upheld every term of the prenup. My sole ownership of the cottage was confirmed. The remaining investments were split exactly as the agreement allowed. 80% to me, 20% to him. He barely nodded. As we left the courtroom, he tried to speak. "Elena," he said softly, "if I had known it would end like this." I turned to him, calm, steady. "It didn't end like this, Patrick. It ended a long time ago. You just didn't notice." He looked like he wanted to argue, or cry, or maybe just run. But instead he said nothing, and I walked away. No drama, no speeches, just heels on marble, echoing softly down a hallway that didn't belong to either of us anymore. Back at the cottage, the rain had stopped. A breeze moved through the curtains. My mug of tea was still warm, and the sea was calm again, as if it had been waiting for me. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch barefoot. The wind chime rang gently above me. That afternoon, I opened a new journal. The first page, blank and waiting. At the top I wrote, "You don't always get closure from them. Sometimes you give it to yourself." I smiled, then closed the book, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, not of revenge, not of rebuilding, but of rediscovery. The life I had handed away in pieces was back in my hands, stronger, quieter, more mine than ever. Patrick had dreamed of a house by the sea. I gave it to him, and then I kept it, along with everything he never truly saw in me. "We're cutting ties." That was the voicemail I got from my father at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday night. No explanation, no lead up, just those words. Cold, practiced, like a business memo, not a message to his only daughter. By the time I finished listening, my hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't pounding. I just felt still, as if something I had quietly suspected for years had finally been confirmed out loud. I didn't call back. I didn't ask why. I just texted him 2 words. Understood. Then I quietly logged into the loan management portal I had access to, the one tied to the commercial property that supported my family's 3rd-generation business. And I removed my name. That signature, given out of trust 2 years ago, was the only thing standing between their expansion and bankruptcy. I never imagined I'd need to revoke it. But then again, I also never imagined being disowned by voicemail. It took less than 6 minutes. By the time I got up from my desk, the weight I'd been carrying for years had already begun to lift. 36 hours later, I woke up to 78 missed calls from Mom, 13 from Dad, 7 from my older brother, and 1 voicemail from my father's accountant that ended with him screaming, "We need to talk." Immediately, that was the moment I knew. They didn't cut me off. I had finally cut them loose. You don't grow up in a family business without learning that the word family often comes second. My father, Richard, built his company the way he built our household. Brick by brick, rule by rule, with very little room for softness. He ran a chain of auto shops across the state. By the time I was 12, I could read profit and loss sheets better than bedtime stories. By 16, I was doing the payroll for shop number 3 during school breaks. It was never a request. It was an expectation. "We don't hire outsiders," he used to say. "We raise replacements." The business became the family, and loyalty was the unspoken currency. You didn't question decisions. You didn't complain. And you definitely didn't talk back. My older brother, Mason, was always the heir apparent. He could skip responsibilities and still be praised for potential. I, on the other hand, was the invisible backbone, organizing files, correcting his mistakes, smoothing over his tantrums during investor meetings. My mother? She stayed out of it. Her job was to host Smile and occasionally remind me to be grateful for what your father's building for us. For a long time, I tried to earn my place. I got my MBA top of my class, turned down a competitive job offered to stay and help expand the business when they wanted to launch a new headquarters. I negotiated the lease terms, secured the best rates, and at the last minute, when the bank asked for a second signer for the operating loan, I didn't hesitate. I signed, because I was raised to believe that family was forever, that if I showed I was loyal, I'd finally be seen. I was wrong. The cracks started showing last year when I questioned some of Mason's expense reports. He'd been billing personal trips to the company card, private dinners labeled client meetings. When I brought it up to my father, he dismissed me flatly. Don't nitpick your brother. He's learning. 2 months later, they removed me from board meetings to streamline decisions. I was given vague updates, handed edited reports, and told not to worry about the finances. And then the reunion invite came, or rather, it didn't. Just that voicemail. Cold. Final. Strategically timed right after I submitted a financial report to the bank that flagged misuse of funds under Mason's name. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a cover-up. And I wasn't family anymore. So I stopped being their safety net. And that's when things truly began to collapse. In hindsight, the signs were everywhere. But when you grow up craving approval, you become fluent in denial. The first real crack was subtle. It was during a budget review, a routine meeting where I pointed out that one of our vendors had submitted duplicate invoices, about $12,000 in padded costs over 3 months. I flagged it immediately, expecting a quick fix. But Mason laughed. It's a friend of mine. Let it slide. We'll get better terms later. I brought it up to Dad after the meeting. Calmly, professionally. He didn't look up from his desk, just muttered, "You need to stop acting like an outsider." That word stuck in my ribs for weeks. Outsider. Despite managing logistics for 4 expansions, renegotiating our fleet lease at half the cost, and keeping our books spotless for 6 years, I was still just a liability if I asked too many questions. After that conversation, my access to back-end systems slowly shrank. First, I was removed from vendor communications. Then, my login to the loan dashboard stopped working. The company credit card they'd given me expired, but wasn't replaced. Every time I asked, I was told there was a system update or temporary reallocation. And yet, Mason got a new office chair that cost more than my first car. I started keeping a private folder on my home computer. I reactivated an old contact at the bank, someone who owed me a favor, and casually asked to review the company's loan structure. What I found wasn't shocking, just disappointing. The loan we had taken 2 years earlier to expand into regional markets, the one that was supposed to fuel our future, was underwritten with 2 names, my father's and mine, and the payments barely being made. The company was behind. The collateral terms were close to default. And worse, my name was being used to keep creditors patient. Because I had excellent credit, because I had no debt, because I was the responsible one. And yet, I wasn't even being told the truth. I started pulling everything I could. Internal spending reports, emails Mason sent under my name, records of where the funds were going. That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was strategic exploitation. They'd been phasing me out of the family, but keeping me just close enough to cash in on my signature, until they didn't need me, until I flagged the truth to the bank. And suddenly, I wasn't family anymore. I was inconvenient. When the voicemail came, it didn't shatter me. It confirmed everything I already knew, and it gave me permission to do what I'd already started preparing for. I didn't respond emotionally. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. Instead, I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and clicked into the secure folder I'd labeled Redemption Plan. Inside, a digital copy of the loan agreement I had signed 2 years ago, evidence of loan misuse, my communications with the bank, a termination request Danielle had drafted weeks earlier. Yes, the same Danielle from law school, the woman who had helped Elena take down her husband in a different life. Some connections are worth keeping. Danielle and I had reviewed the terms multiple times. I had signed as a co-applicant, but not as a guarantor. That meant if I formally withdrew my name before restructuring, the bank was obligated to notify the business and requalify the loan without me. And without me, their financial standing crumbled. Danielle said one line that stayed with me. Don't scream, don't warn. Just move the brick holding the wall up and let it fall. So that's what I did. I submitted the withdrawal online. It took 4 minutes. Then I emailed the bank my evidence, vendor fraud, personal misuse of funds, and changes in my access that proved I was being deliberately shut out. The bank froze the account within the hour. Quietly, no notice to them. They needed time to review the irregularities. In reality, they were scrambling to calculate how risky this loan had just become. And while they scrambled, I called the accountant. Mine, not my father's. I explained the situation. We went over my exposure, personal credit impact, and asset protection. I'd moved my savings into a trust the week before. My credit lines were now firewalled. They couldn't touch me. Then I waited. 36 hours after I removed my name, the messages started. My mom's missed calls. Mason's texts. What the hell did you do? Dad's emails, call me now. Urgent. And finally, a voicemail from his accountant, voice shaking with panic. The loan is collapsing. The bank's pulled support. We're at risk of default. You need to fix this. Now. I played it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because it sounded like justice. And justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't scream. It echoes. The first call I answered was from my mother. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with desperation. Sweetheart, what's happening? Your father says the bank is freezing the accounts, that they might recall the loan. They said you signed something. I stayed silent for a moment, then said, I removed my name. That's all. Her breath caught. But you can't just do that. Actually, I can. And I did. Elena, she whispered, this affects all of us. No, I replied gently. You made sure it didn't. Click. I didn't owe them explanations. Not anymore. The next day, the family business's accounts were officially marked as non-compliant. The bank sent a formal notice of default review, citing evidence of financial misconduct and unauthorized transactions. Mason was listed as the primary financial officer. He tried to blame it on a clerical error. It didn't work. Vendors started pulling out. A local news site ran a quiet piece. Family auto chain faces financial turmoil amid internal disputes. I didn't leak the story, but I knew who did. Danielle said it best when she called to update me. When people lose power, they look for someone to blame. They just didn't expect that person to have already walked away. The voicemails became more aggressive. From Dad, you ungrateful child. We built that business for you. You're ruining your future. From Mason, you think you're so clever, but you'll need us someday. From the accountant again, do you understand what this means? You've destroyed their legacy. What none of them could admit was that they had destroyed it long before I pulled out. They destroyed it when they used my name, but denied me a seat at the table. They destroyed it when they decided I was a threat, not a daughter. They destroyed it the moment they made me invisible. Now, the loan was caving in, the trust between partners gone, the business teetering on collapse. And I was untouched. No legal backlash. No financial liability. Just clean credit and a quieter inbox. I forwarded the last voicemail to Danielle and deleted the rest. And then I took my phone off silent for the first time in 2 days, because the storm they created was no longer my responsibility to clean up. They called a family meeting, not because they wanted to fix things, but because they had finally realized I was the only one who could. They picked the same restaurant we used for birthdays growing up. Same private room. Same table near the fireplace. But this time there were no balloons. No toasts. No laughter. Just Dad, Mom, Mason, and an empty chair waiting for me, as if they still believed they had the right to summon me. I walked in 15 minutes late, on purpose. Mason stood as I entered. Thanks for coming. I didn't come for you, I said, taking a seat. Let's not waste each other's time. Dad leaned forward. You made your point. Loud and clear. No, I said calmly. The bank made my point. I just stopped protecting your lie. His jaw tensed. We're trying to hold this together. You think you're punishing us, but you're punishing the legacy your grandfather built. Grandpa didn't build a legacy, I replied. He built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship. Mason scoffed. Oh, come on. We gave you everything. I looked him dead in the eye. You gave me a job, not a voice. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, my mother spoke, quietly. What do you want, Elena? And that was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? Not revenge. I had already taken that. What I wanted was clarity. I stood placing a sealed envelope on the table. This is a signed affidavit confirming I've permanently withdrawn from the company loan, the board, and all business operations. You will never use my name again. Dad opened his mouth. I'm not finished, I said. I'm also submitting an anonymous tip to the state auditor. There are funds missing, vendors unpaid, payroll inconsistencies. It's your mess now. Fully. Legally. Mason's face went red. You'd destroy us over ego? No, I said, collecting my purse. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just removing the illusion that I was ever part of it. As I walked toward the door, my father said the last thing I ever expected. Elena, please. I paused, not from hesitation, but from satisfaction. Then I said, without turning around, you left a voicemail telling me we're done. I'm just agreeing with you, formally. And then I walked away. I thought walking away would feel like a fall. But it didn't. It felt like finally breathing in a room where the air wasn't rationed. For the first time in years, I woke up without checking my inbox for fires I didn't start. My calendar wasn't crammed with meetings I wasn't invited to speak in. And my phone didn't ring unless someone actually wanted to hear from me. I moved into a small loft downtown, open windows, quiet mornings, and enough space for both a desk and my peace of mind. I started consulting for small women-run startups, helping them do what I was never allowed to do, make decisions. Turns out the skills I sharpened in silence were gold in the right hands. One of my first clients asked why I left the family business. I told her, because I stopped confusing being useful with being respected. She nodded like she'd heard those words in her own life too. I saw Danielle often. We met over coffee, and she kept trying to convince me to start something official, a boutique firm that helps women get out of toxic business ties and protect their futures. We sketched out a name on a napkin, Anchor and Flame, because sometimes you steady a ship, and sometimes you burn it down. Within a month, we had our first 3 clients. Not just women from broken partnerships, but daughters, wives, and sisters who'd been told they were part of something until they dared to ask for control. Helping them didn't heal me. It reminded me that I'd already done that. I didn't need apologies from my father, or respect from my brother, or recognition from anyone who had trained me to shrink. I had what they never gave me, not inheritance or legacy, but freedom. And freedom, once it's tasted, doesn't settle for less. 3 months after courtroom settled it all, I got one final envelope from the family business. It wasn't from my father or Mason. It was from the bank. Inside was a simple letter. The commercial loan tied to your name has been fully transferred and settled. No further obligation remains. No, thank you. No apology. Just a clean line drawn in ink and legality. I smiled. Closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it arrives as a final balance statement with zeros across the board. I placed the letter in a file marked complete and slid it into the back of my cabinet. That night, I lit a candle on my loft windowsill and opened the window wide. Outside, the city hummed, distant but alive. I thought about that voicemail one last time. Don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties. They wanted silence, obedience, absence, and they got all 3. But what they didn't expect was that I would thrive in that silence, that I would build something not out of revenge, but out of truth, that I would become more than the invisible daughter they used for signatures and silence. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the latest client file, scribbled a note to a woman named Mira, whose husband had locked her out of their bakery's books. Under it, I wrote, "You're not difficult. You're just finally visible." The candle flickered. The air moved. The city didn't stop, and neither would I. And that was the last time I thought of it as cutting ties. Because ties can strangle. But letting go? Letting go is how you learn to stand alone. And still stand tall.